Amandeep. How are you?
Hello, Tawfiq. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. Thank you for joining this discussion, which is part of AI Revolutions, an initiative by Project Syndicate and 2040 World. Really happy to have you here. And Where in the world are you?
I'm in New York in my office at the UN Secretariat building.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'm joining you from Dubai, so we're kind of on two parts of the world, but I think this is meant to be a conversation about the global implications of AI and where we're headed. So I think we're in the right locations for this chat.
Absolutely. These are challenges and opportunities without passports, so it doesn't matter where you are.
Well, where I'd like to start, Amandeep, is just a little bit about who you are, and especially this title that you have, the UN Envoy for Technology. I might be using the shorthand, but what's all that about?
Yes, so that's the shorthand. I am the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. So this is a new post that the UN created in 2021, essentially to bring a whole of UN perspective to bear on all technology policy issues, cutting across the three pillars of our work: peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. So I come with a background in engineering and diplomacy. So essentially, I am a science and technology diplomat. And my job, in telegraphic terms, is to translate the Secretary General's vision on technology cooperation, particularly digital technology cooperation, into realistic pieces that we can take forward with governments, with other stakeholders, private sector, civil society. And a big task these days for my office is to support the Global Digital Compact,
Mm.
which is one of the outcomes planned this fall at the Summit of the Future in New York.
Mm. Well, that's very interesting, because the Summit of the Future is really bringing together a lot of stakeholders, I think private, public, civil society. What do you hope to achieve there, or what do you think can be achieved at that gathering?
So, in some ways, it's a renewal of vows. We recommit to multilateral solutions, to collaborating internationally to tackle the big challenges of the day, whether it's
Mhm.
climate change, it is the debt burden and financing for development, or what we call digital cooperation, the
Mm.
challenges of governance around artificial intelligence, around data, preserving an unfragmented, stable internet. So, this is the backdrop.
Mm.
There are old problems that have been around since the charter was signed in
Mm.
1945, but then there are these new challenges that demand new ways of working. So I see the Summit of the Future as a once in a generation opportunity to renew commitment to multilateralism, but also to explore new ways with all stakeholders to get the job done.
Hmm. So, in that whole picture, I mean, there's quite a lot of issues and stakeholders, and like you said, some of the old kind of challenges, some of the new opportunities. Where does artificial intelligence sit in that discussion?
It occupies a very prominent place. So it's a test case of this new way of collaborating.
Hmm.
When the Secretary General presented his thoughts, uh, pooled from across the UN system to member states last year in a policy brief, he mentioned artificial intelligence and the governance of emerging technologies as one of the three pillars of this new approach. So
Hmm.
AI sits in an important place, and to kind of turbocharge the thinking, not just within the UN, but also around the UN. He set up last year a high level advisory body on AI, which is co chaired by James Manieka and Carme Artigas, and has 39 experts from all five regions of the world, including the Minister for Artificial Intelligence from the UAE. So these thinkers, these thought leaders, are helping member states uh, discuss the risks and the challenges, but also the opportunities and the enablers that are needed to realize those opportunities and bring them to the table of the summit through the Global Digital Compact. So there's a unique opportunity to get some decisions adopted at the Summit of the Future with regard to the global governance of AI that allows us to manage the risks, but also seize the opportunities that are definitely out there.
So, in the discussions that you're having and kind of the, let's say, wide ranging kind of introspection of where there can be agreement or alignment, are you finding that there is a lot of alignment around specifically AI being met, or is there still a divergence of perspectives? And could there be kind of a landmark agreement which really gets to the heart of how we manage AI as a global community?
Right. So I'm not um, minimizing the difficulties, the
Mm,
geopolitical challenges, the competition around tech in general and AI in particular. There's a scramble for compute, to look at developing your own AIs. There's a
mm,
kind of competition that's out there, commercial, starkly, but also geopolitical. So I'm not minimizing all of that, but I do see uh, some hope in bringing people together. And why do I say that?
mm,
So, when the advisory body presented its interim report around Christmas last year, so it described some principles for international collaboration on AI. It also listed out certain functions that it felt should be performed at the international level,
mm,
separate from complementary to what's being done at the national level, the US executive order, the EU AI Act, and so on,
mm.
and separate from what the industry is doing through the partnership on AI or other kind of self regulatory, self governing coalitions. So it listed out those functions, and the response to those functions has been overwhelmingly positive. And what are
Mm.
those functions? One, a foundational level function of horizon scanning. What's out there? What's the direction that technology is taking? So that all of us have the same science based appreciation of the risks, the implications, and the opportunities to be done on a regular basis, say every 6 months, not like, every few years, because tech is moving fast. Then another function that found overwhelming support is that of reinforcing interoperability. True AI governance is a sovereign choice. Different countries, different regions will take their own approaches, but we have a need to bring everything together to make sure that we understand each other when we pursue our respective sovereign governance approaches, make sure that the private sector can operate across borders and civil society has common benchmarks to assess if things are going right or wrong. And another function that has resonated quite a lot is capacity building, that many countries are lagging behind. There is an existing digital divide, which could be accentuated by rapid developments in AI. As you know, AI is concentrated in a few geographies, even in a few companies. So, how do we democratize the opportunity in a responsible way? How do we build capacity? So, a lot of resonance of those suggestions. And just to finish off on why am I positive on this, recently, in fact, after several months of discussions, a consensus resolution was adopted in the UN General Assembly on AI and its opportunities for the SDGs. So there is a window of opportunity, and if
Right.
we move fast, we can seize the opportunity.
So it's not too late. What you're saying is we time might be accelerating, so to speak, but it's still on our side to kind of get somewhere here.
Yes, yes, definitely. So the next 6 to 12 months are crucial. I think if we wait too long, let's say we wait 2 years, there's no rush, let's take things easy, etc., then we may miss this window of opportunity. And then
Mm,
things will get baked in and there will be fragmentation. So I'm thinking here of the counterfactual. So if
mm,
we don't come together and set up some foundational pieces on AI governance, with sovereign choices having their place, then what happens? We have fragmentation of governance efforts. We have information asymmetry with regard to what is happening. So even advanced countries may not have the right knowledge for policy making. So we are making policy in the dark, in a sense. we will have a widening digital divide, which will lead to resentment in the global south. And we'll miss out on handling some of the risks that are coming: misinformation, disinformation, biases being amplified, uh, potential misuse to develop bioweapons, and so on. And importantly, miss out on the opportunities, the exciting opportunities that are there for the sustainable development goals, whether it's developing new kinds of let's say, health services, pandemic surveillance, uh, drug discovery, or it is developing climate change resilient agriculture varieties and so on.
So if, all of this is being worked on, what is the culmination point? Is it a treaty? Is there an AI treaty? What does that framework look like? And does it become obligatory or almost advisory?
So, Tofik, I worked for a couple of years in a treaty framework on AI in the military space, so lethal
Right.
autonomous weapons. Now, there are some narrow areas where potentially you could have treaty like instruments to govern AI. And the military domain is one of those, and there's a discussion that's ongoing. It's not an easy discussion, but I think by and large, we are not speaking of treaties at this point. We don't have that kind of a risk or that kind of a technology and its ecosystem that we had with nuclear weapons or with other powerful technologies in the past. So we have to be more inventive. We have to think out of the box, and we need a kind of a more diverse tool set to deal with this issue. So a combination of soft norms based in some hard law, existing law, international human rights law, international humanitarian law, the Sustainable Development Goals framework, and so on. I think that's what we are aiming at. And when I spoke of the Global Digital Compact, a compact at the end of the day sits between a resolution, a nice declaration of political will, and a kind of a more binding framework. So I think that's the space that we are targeting. And this is also attractive for different stakeholders because the tech is moving fast, and you have developers that are in the private sector. You have a supply chain that is spread out over the globe. So hard law, except in a few narrow areas, doesn't make sense to me. That said, I think in the national space, national regulatory space, you will need to rely on hard law. I mean, you look at the US executive order,
Mm.
it relies on some hard law, whether it's the Defense Production Act or something else. And you look
Right.
at the EU AI Act, it also lies on some basis, some foundation in law. So those things will be there, and Chinese interim measures on generative AI. But I think at the international level, we have to be more nuanced about this.
So, in Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of this energy, momentum, some of the companies that, we would call leaders in AI, there is a debate around what some would call effective accelerationism, and allowing technology just to grow and expand in and of itself that will provide opportunity. And those who believe there should be policy and regulation, particularly around AI. Where do you stand on that, debate? Do you think policy and regulation actually will restrict progress, or is there a balance to be made?
I think that's a false dichotomy. So
Mm.
between these two tribes of accelerators, and sometimes you hear other terms applied to the other side, uh,
Mm.
doomers or doomsayers. I think uh, they have important points to make, and sometimes those are being made rhetorically. So there's a dialectic underway. That's fine,
Right.
and I think uh, the sharpness of that debate is reducing already. It's
Mm.
working through the systems, but it's a false dichotomy. I think without effective governance, without inclusive participation, you cannot realize the opportunities. You cannot innovate because the risks are too high.
Right.
Someone makes a mistake and the entire field gets set back because there'll be a boomerang, there'll be a backlash, and there'll be heavy-handed regulations. So we don't want to get there. And then I'll be personally quite disappointed that the exciting opportunities around acceleration of science and R&D and the expansion of the digital economy would be lost if we didn't have the right governance in place and people made mistakes and we lost the trust of the public or lost the trust of the lawmakers and governments. So I think the two go together, innovation and governance. In fact, we have to be careful of those who are either trying to push the risk so far into the future and to extreme scenarios that we stop caring about what is important now and in the medium term, the displacement in the workplace, for
Mm,
instance, or
mm,
some of the concerns around undermining of public trust in institutions if synthetic reality kind of proliferates widely. So we have to be balanced in terms of how we look
mm,
at the risks, and also have to be balanced in terms of what is healthy for the innovation ecosystem today, tomorrow, and day after.
mm.
Because if it becomes too narrowly founded today, then we miss out on innovation. It's still a developing field. We are at in science terms, the technology and the engineering. I'm an engineer, so the engineering has accelerated ahead. You have a lot of bright people being thrown at the engineering side of the equation, but the science is still developing, and we need a kind of diverse, healthy science and innovation ecosystem for us to get to the next level of AI.
So, when you think about the global south, which you mentioned, I mean, AI in some ways is this great opportunity, but it's also a great equalizer, right? All of a sudden, you have at your fingertips, human knowledge, you have capabilities, you can scale very fast from any part of the world uh, in enterprises, but in knowledge, etc. It really starts to level the playing field. But when you start having regulation and policy, you could bring elements of closed source models, patent protection, IP barriers. How do we enable this to really be kind of a leapfrog moment for people in the global south, young people around the world, and protect them from, let's say, the gatekeepers who might be using a number of legal provisions to kind of prevent really the full utilization of this for progress and development?
That's a tremendous question, and I think an important one. So there are two parts to the answer. The first one is the nuance in governance and regulation that you've implied.
Mm,
So we have to make sure that governance is not gamed, that it's not gamed in the favor of big tech and companies who can afford to run the regulatory gauntlet and have large teams of lawyers and public relations experts to manage the regulatory side. So it has to be agile, it has to be smart, and it has to respect the needs, the innovation needs that I mentioned earlier. I
mm,
think the other aspect is beyond regulation, it's about promotion of opportunities. And that's where I think uh, public interest, public tech investments are important. So there is the governance side of it, but related to it is access to compute, access to data, interoperability. So making public data sets available to entrepreneurs in a responsible manner. Because if you don't have governance, then access to that data is not possible. People will lose
right.
the trust. So my health data, I don't want to give it to anyone. So governance will ensure that there is access to data, there's interoperability around data, and more entrepreneurs can build models on top of those data sets. And also, we need to make sure that entrepreneurs are able to kind of train their models across borders, test them across borders, and they have access points into the digital economy, and all the digital economy opportunities are not just flowing to a few. So there are two sides to it, and smarter governments, I think, in the global south are already thinking about this.
Mm.
So there is, I mean, you can call it a promotional aspect, but there is a governance aspect and there's a promotional aspect, and smarter governments are doing the two together. I've heard from um, senior officials, ministers in the global south, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Africa, Latin America, that they want to start with light touch regulation, more agile regulation that may be law based, particularly in the context of data governance, but in the context of AI and models, that's more agile, so that there's more experimentation. They can see where the niche opportunities are and how the local innovation ecosystem and startups respond to those. And then as they gather the experience, they want to kind of accordion in uh,
Mm.
more structured governance. So I respect that. But I think what we need at the international level is some foundational pieces that support governments in putting in place those kind of nuanced governance and promotional responses. So this is the balance that we are trying to reach within the advisory body on AI and in the Global Digital Compact at the Summit of the Future.
Well, sounds like a lot of different issues, but that you're starting to kind of weave a thread of contiguity between them. Amandeep, as we move forward, in the AI Revolutions Initiative and try to provoke the right conversations, it would be great as we kind of wrap up to get your advice. What are some of the areas where we need to have some further, voices at the table? What do you think should be highlighted? Where can we add more insight into what is already a crowded conversation?
One set of voices that I sorely miss is startups and small companies from around the world. So when I go into meetings, multi-stakeholder meetings, there are usual suspects, those 8, 10 companies that are always there. So I miss the voice of
Mm.
smaller companies, startups. Often they are stretched, they have better things to focus on. But I do wish there was a way to bring those voices in, even if it's on a rotating representational basis. I also miss the voices of independent academics and scientists on AI. There are a few, and they are doing commendable work. So there is a space for R&D, for research, as I mentioned, the science side of AI. I think we need to bolster that. There's not enough investment going in there. So it's not only auditing and evals and metrics and benchmarks, but it's about what is actually working, what's happening inside the models. So I miss more of the research and the science side of the equation. And then, frankly, on the government side, I miss the enthusiasm sometimes for public tech and public interest ways of looking at. So often, diplomats, my tribe starts to look at it from a very national perspective. I have these champions and I must kind of hang on to those. And how can I work the governance discussions so that it benefits my national companies, suits my digital economy, etc. So I wish there was a little more appreciation, more support for the international collaboration side of it, because this tech is very different from previous tech revolutions. So we would need international collaboration from day one. I don't think uh, overly nationalistic approaches are going to work, but unfortunately, there's a bias towards them at this point in time. We have to work through this, but I wish we had less of that.
Well, those are all good points, and I think it's exactly where our thinking is headed. So this has been a great, conversation, Amandeep, and I look forward to continuing the chat over the next 6 to 12 months and seeing, what is the progress we make, and hopefully the next time it will be in person when we see each other.
Look forward to that, Tawfiq. Thank you. Thank you for the conversation today.
Thank you.